They create so much space and confusion that in the end, nothing coheres. The solution is to plan, to have a clear idea what you want, then put yourself in open space and give yourself options to work with. You direct the situation, but leave room for unexpected opportunities and random events. Both generals and artists can be judged by the way they handle chaos and confusion, embracing it, yet guiding it for their own purposes. 5. One day in the Japan of the 1540s, in a ferry boat crowded with farmers, merchants, and craftsmen, a young samurai regaled all who would listen with tales of his great victories as a swordsman, wielding his 3-foot-long sword as he spoke to demonstrate his prowess. The other passengers were a little afraid of this athletic young man, so they feigned interest in his stories to avoid trouble. But one older man sat to the side, ignoring the young boaster. The older man was obviously a samurai himself. He carried 2 swords, but no one knew that this was in fact Tsukahara Bokuden, perhaps the greatest swordsman of his time. He was in his 50s by then and liked to travel alone and incognito. Bokuden sat with his eyes closed, seemingly deep in meditation. His stillness and silence began to annoy the young samurai, who finally called out, "Don't you like this kind of talk? You don't even know how to wield a sword, old man, do you?" "I most certainly do," answered Bokuden. "My way, however, is not to wield my sword in such inconsequential circumstances as these." "A way of using a sword that doesn't use a sword?" said the young samurai. "Don't talk gibberish. What is your school of fighting called?" "It is called Mutakatsu Ryu, style that wins without swords or fighting," replied Bokuden. "What? Mutakatsu Ryu? Don't be ridiculous. How can you defeat an opponent without fighting?" By now the young samurai was angry and irritated, and he demanded that Bokuden demonstrate his style, challenging him to a fight then and there. Bokuden refused to duel in the crowded boat, but said he would show the samurai Mutakatsu Ryu at the nearest shore, and he asked the ferryman to guide the boat to a tiny nearby island. The young man began to swing his sword to loosen up. Bokuden continued to sit with his eyes closed. As they approached the island, the impatient challenger shouted, "Come, you are as good as dead. I will show you how sharp my sword is." He then leaped onto the shore. Bokuden took his time, further infuriating the young samurai, who began to hurl insults. Bokuden finally handed the ferryman his sword, saying, "My style is Mutakatsu Ryu. I have no need for a sword." And with those words, he took the ferryman's long oar and pushed it hard against the shore, sending the boat quickly out into the water and away from the island. The samurai screamed, demanding the boat's return. Bokuden shouted back to him, "This is what is called victory without fighting. I dare you to jump into the water and swim here." Now the passengers on the boat could look back at the young samurai receding into the distance, stranded on the island, jumping up and down, flailing his arms as his cries became fainter and fainter. They began to laugh. Bokuden had clearly demonstrated Mutakatsu Ryu. Interpretation. The minute Bokuden heard the arrogant young samurai's voice, he knew there would be trouble. A duel on a crowded boat would be a disaster, and a totally unnecessary one. He had to get the young man off the boat without a fight, and to make the defeat humiliating. He would do this through maneuver. First, he remained still and quiet, drawing the man's attention away from the innocent passengers and drawing him toward Bokuden like a magnet. Then, he confused the man with a rather irrational name for a school of fighting, overheating the samurai's rather simple mind with a perplexing concept. The flustered samurai tried to cover up with bluster. He was now so angry and mentally off balance that he leaped to the shore alone, failing to consider the rather obvious meaning of Mutakatsu Ryu, even once he got there. Bokuden was a samurai who always depended on setting up his opponents first and winning the victory easily, by maneuver rather than brute force. This was the ultimate demonstration of his art. The goal of maneuver is to give you easy victories, which you do by luring opponents into leaving their fortified positions of strength for unfamiliar terrain where they must fight off balance. Since your opponent's strength is inseparable from their ability to think straight, your maneuvers must be designed to make them emotional and befuddled. If you are too direct in this maneuvering, you run the risk of revealing your game. You must be subtle, drawing opponents toward you with enigmatic behavior, slowly getting under their skin with provocative comments and actions, then suddenly stepping back. When you feel that their emotions are engaged, that their frustration and anger are mounting, you can speed up the tempo of your maneuvers. Properly set up, your opponents will leap onto the island and strand themselves, giving you the easy victory. Reversal. There is neither point nor honor in seeking direct battle for its own sake. That kind of fighting, however, may have value as part of a maneuver or strategy. A sudden envelopment or powerful frontal blow when the enemy is least expecting it can be crushing. The only danger in maneuver is that you give yourself so many options that you yourself get confused. Keep it simple. Limit yourself to the options you can control. Here are further reflections on the ripening for the sickle strategy. By Byzantine Emperor Mauricios. Warfare is like hunting. Wild animals are taken by scouting, by nets, by lying in wait, by stalking, by circling around, and by other such stratagems rather than by sheer force. In waging war, we should proceed in the same way, whether the enemy be many or few. To try simply to overpower the enemy in the open, hand to hand and face to face, even though you might appear to win, is an enterprise which is very risky and can result in serious harm. Apart from extreme emergency, it is ridiculous to try to gain a victory which is so costly and brings only empty glory. From The Art of Maneuver by Robert R. Leonhard. Addicts of attrition, as Simkin calls them, generally cannot think beyond the battle, and they consider that the only way, or at least the preferred way, to defeat an enemy is to destroy the physical components of his army, especially the combat portions, armored fighting vehicles, troops, guns, etc. If the attrition addict appreciates war's intangibles at all, such as morale, initiative, and shock, he sees them only as combat multipliers with which to fight the attrition battle better. If the attrition warrior learns about maneuver, he sees it primarily as a way to get to the fight. In other words, he moves in order to fight. Maneuver theory, on the other hand, attempts to defeat the enemy through means other than simple destruction of his mass. Indeed, the highest and purest application of maneuver theory is to preempt the enemy. That is, to disarm or neutralize him before the fight. If such is not possible, the maneuver warrior seeks to dislocate the enemy forces, i.e., removing the enemy from the decisive point, or vice versa, thus rendering them useless and irrelevant to the fight. If the enemy cannot be preempted or dislocated, then the maneuver warfare practitioner will attempt to disrupt the enemy, i.e., destroy or neutralize his center of gravity, preferably by attacking with friendly strengths through enemy weaknesses. By Napoleon Bonaparte. Aptitude for maneuver is the supreme skill in a general. It is the most useful and rarest of gifts by which genius is estimated. From The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Now the army's disposition of force is like water. Water's configuration avoids heights and races downward. Water configures its flow in accord with the terrain. The army controls its victory in accord with the enemy. Thus the army does not maintain any constant strategic configuration of power, Water has no constant shape. One who is able to change and transform in accord with the enemy and wrest victory is termed spiritual. From Aesop's Fables. The Reed and the Olive. The reed and the olive tree were arguing over their steadfastness, strength, and ease. The olive taunted the reed for its powerlessness and pliancy in the face of all the winds. The reed kept quiet and didn't say a word. Then, not long after this, the wind blew violently. The reed, shaken and bent, escaped easily from it, but the olive tree, resisting the wind, was snapped by its force. The story shows that people who yield to circumstances and to superior power have the advantage over their stronger rivals. The Campaigns of Napoleon by David G. Chandler.